Hey guys, it's Lewis from Recycle Bicycle Sales here. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to use the gears on your bicycle properly. This video is targeted towards people that haven't really ridden a bike before. They might not call themselves a cyclist just yet. They're just getting their first road bike or thinking about getting their first road bike and don't think that they know a whole lot yet. If you already call yourself a cyclist, you might already know a lot of the stuff that we talk about in this video. So what actually are the gears? The gears are the part that allow the power from your body translate into power through the bike. They're what help you drive the bike forwards. One of the interesting things about gears actually is that you generally have lots of gears. You have more than just a single cog, which means that you can adjust through the gears and you can make it feel a little bit different. Each revolution of the pedal might not necessarily be one revolution of the wheel. If you've got a really hard gear, you might get 3 revolutions of the wheel, or if you're in a really easy gear, you might only get 1 revolution of the wheel. We can change to easier gears to make it easier to go up a hill when we're going slowly, or we can go to a harder gear for when we're going back down the other side so we can still be pedaling. Gears are one of those things that make cycling a little bit easier. Just so that we're on the same page in this video, let me quickly explain the anatomy of the drivetrain of a bike to you. We've got the 2 shifters up the front. Sometimes if you've got a mountain bike, you might only have 1, but we tend to have 2 shifters up the front. We've got 2 derailleurs, which will help you derail the chain between different cogs on the front or on the back. We've got chain rings and cranks on the front. Chain rings, that's the part that the chain sits on and they're in the shape of a ring. And then we've got the rear cassette, which tends to have quite a few different gears to pick from. So they're the different words for the different things I'm talking about. Shifters, derailleurs, chainring, cassette. The most obvious difference between the front gears and the rear gears is there's different amounts. On the front, you've usually got like 2 or 3 maybe, but on the back you might have like 10 to 12. So there tends to be quite a few more cogs at the back. What you'll find on a bike ride is that you'll adjust the rear gears, which is your right hand, 50 times, maybe even more, but you might only change the left hand, which is your front, once or twice every couple of rides. You won't use the front one quite as often. So what you'll find between the front gears and the rear gears is the front gears will make a really big difference. That's like going up a hill really slowly or coming back down really quickly on the other side. Whereas the rear gears will make small little adjustments as you're going a little bit faster or a little bit slower. You can make a small adjustment there. That's why you'll change the rear gears quite a bit during a bike ride. And the reason for that is with the front gears, we've got one cog that's about that big and one that's about that big. So there's quite a big difference. Whereas on the rear gears, you might have one that's that big and then that big and then that big and then that big and then that big. And there's small changes between each one. That's why the rear gears won't make as much of a difference as what the front gears do. When we're looking at the shifters, in general, there tends to be 2 different buttons. That's because we want to be able to go up one way or down the other way, so 2 distinct buttons. This one here is a mechanical shifter, not one of the fancy electronic ones. It's got 2 buttons. You've got one which is the smaller button, and then one which is the entire lever, that's the bigger button. I'll show you from the front on. You've got the side button, or you can press the entire lever across. So there's 2 distinct buttons. Same deal with the other hand as well, which would click across from the other side. This is the left-hand one here, where I just stopped myself from saying then that the small button does this thing and the big button does that thing because it's mirrored on the opposite sides. What we'll find is that the smaller button will move you to the smaller cog, but on the front chain rings, the smaller cog is easier, and on the back chain rings, the smaller cog is harder. This might sound confusing with just the words that you're hearing, but it will make sense when you're out there riding. The point that I'm getting at here is pressing the small button is quite easy because it's just a little click. Pressing the big button, the big lever, you've got to press it quite far across, so it is a little bit harder. You'll find, especially on the front chainring, when you're going from a cog that's that big right up to a cog that's that big, you've really got to press it quite hard to actually get it all the way across. It's a really common story when people buy a bike here and they're test riding around the car park, really happy, take the bike home, call me a couple of days later, Lewis, I can't change the front derailleur, it's not working. And I have to try and explain that it does feel quite different. I've learned from that with enough people now that I make that a big talking point when we're selling a bike now as well. But the front derailleur will feel harder than the rear derailleur. Don't be confused by that. When we upgrade from a mechanical drivetrain up to the electronic drivetrain, whether it's Shimano's version of Di2 or SRAM's version of ETAP, we'll find that we go from pressing a lever, so this has an entire click that I can do, whereas when we move up to the electronic stuff, it's usually just a little button. You just have to tap it. You don't have to like press it all the way across. So it will be a little bit easier to click when you move up to those more expensive drivetrains. Now let's talk about how to actually change gear. What I'm going to say here is if you're changing gear, It's best to do it not under load, ideally, although sometimes you'll have to be putting down a bit of power going up a steep hill. Ideally, if you're putting down a bit of power going up a steep hill, if you can be ready to click that gear while you're pedaling and then just let off the power for a second, quickly change it, and then once you hear it click in, then you can get back on it, that's ideal. It's obviously not always gonna work out that way, but it's the most mechanically sympathetic way that you can take care of your bike by trying to do it without having any crazy load under there. One of the best ways that I like to do it is to shift before changing speed. So I can try and, move my feet a little bit faster if I can, click a gear and then get on top of that gear, and then my feet are moving at a fair cadence that I'm quite happy with. If you have ever driven a manual car, speaking to the car community out there who have driven a manual car, when you're driving along and it's time to change a gear, you'll press the clutch with your foot and then you'll move the gear stick and then you'll take the clutch back out. That's kind of a similar thought process to what we're doing here with the bike. Sometimes you could just like smash it in and dry shift and whatever, and it's like, sometimes it'll work if you're in a fancy race car or sports car maybe. Totally not ideal, but it could kind of do it. Same idea with the bike here. Ideally, you want to be able to let off the power, disengage the clutch a little bit, and then drop it into that gear and then get back onto the power again. Ideally, that's how we want to take care of our bike. So if you're riding along the flat, ideally, you want to put a bit of power down, stop pedaling for a sec, change gear, and then get back on top of it again. I know that this might sound a little bit confusing just with the words that I'm saying here, but it will start to make sense once you're pedaling along. It's just being, giving it a bit of sympathy, taking care of the bike. You're not trying to hurt the bike, you're trying to work with the bike. Also, for your best chance of it shifting into the gear that you want it to do, if you can do it while seated, there's less that can go wrong. If you're standing up, going up a steep hill, and you're pedaling and you try and change a gear, there's a small chance, but it is a chance, that the chain might drop off and miss, and then you've completely disengaged, you might hit your knee on the handlebar, something could go wrong. Pretty unlikely, but it's more likely to happen when you're standing up than when you're sitting down. So that's something that I would recommend doing, trying to do it while seated if you can, although you can't always. And also, you don't want to shift too many gears at once. Ideally, one at a time would be nice. Click, and then you'll hear it drop in, click, you'll hear it drop in, click, you'll hear it drop in. If you went click, 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 and then it just drops straight into that third gear there, it's just a bit rough on your bike, to be honest. That's kind of all it is. Yes, it can handle it, but it's just being a little bit rough. That might prematurely wear the chain. It might throw the chain off, and then you've got to stop on the side of the road and put it back on. It's just, again, all I'm talking about here is mechanical sympathy. Cadence is a word that we can talk about with cycling quite a bit. Cadence is talking about how fast your feet are actually moving. We count in RPM, which is revolutions per minute. If you want a more in-depth video all about cadence, you can watch that over here as well. We did that just a couple of weeks ago. And cadence is a number that ideally you probably want to keep, and you'll learn it in the video, somewhere around maybe 90 RPM. That's a pretty average number. If you're going up a steep hill and you're doing 10 kilometers per hour, or if you're coming back down that same steep hill and you're doing 50 kilometers per hour, if you change your gear, you could be pedaling at the exact same cadence, the exact same speed, even though the wheels are going faster or slower. So being able to shift between gears will help you keep that ideal cadence so that you can survive the whole bike ride. As you'll see throughout that video, the incorrect cadence can be detrimental for the whole bike ride. If your cadence is too low, it'll feel very difficult. If your cadence is too high, it'll feel very difficult. That's where gears come in. We're able to find that sweet spot between the two. When we're talking about gears, there's three main mistakes that I see some people make. The first one is cross-chaining. Cross-chaining is when we're sitting in a slightly awkward gear and the chain's sort of twisting a little bit. It can sit in that gear, but it's just not ideal. Cross-chaining can be, there's sort of two main gears on the bike that it can be. On this particular bike here, I've got 2 cogs on the front and I've got 12 on the back. That means that we've got 24 different gears that we can pick from. However, 24 gears, yes, 2 of them are probably not the ideal gear to be in. So really we've got 22 ideal gears. What I'm talking about here is cross-chaining. Cross-chaining means that we might be sitting with a small chainring at the front and the small cog at the back. So instead of the chain being in a perfect line, it's a little bit twisted and you might hear it rubbing on the derailleur or the frame or something like that. And then same with the opposite way. You might be in the big chainring and the big cog at the back, which means that the chain is again twisted on a bit of an angle. Yes, it can sit in this gear, but you'll hear it making a little bit of noise and it just won't perform quite as well. So cross-chaining, small and big, is a gear that I would recommend avoiding if you can. What you'll find, if you're in small and small, that means you're in the easier gear at the front and the harder gear at the back. If you were to go up maybe 2 or 3 at the back, boom, boom, and then change to the big chainring at the front, the chain will be in a straighter line and your cadence will sit at the exact same number, just a smarter gear. And same the other way around as well. If you're in the big cog at the back and the big cog at the front, if you went down 2 or 3 cogs at the back and down to the small chainring at the front, again, the chain's in a more straight line and it's just gonna perform a little bit smoother as well at the same cadence. So you can sit in every gear that your bike has. It's compatible absolutely every way. There's just some gears that are considered smarter than others. The second one is forgetting to put some chain lubricant on. Since your chain is made of metal, we've got an outer link and an inner link. I call it a male and a female. It's 2 pieces of metal that are rubbing up against each other. As they're trying to bend around the chainring at the front or around the cassette at the back, we want it to be able to bend. If it's not bending very well because it's really dry, it might not shift between each cog very well. So if you think that your gears are feeling a little bit average and they're not shifting the way that they were after you had your service, as in a few 100 kilometers after you had your service, that could mean that you need some new chain lube. And then the third thing that I see, and I see it all the time, I have done it myself out here on the shop ride enough times as well, is not shifting down to an easier gear when you get to the traffic lights. When we are riding along down along the beachfront and we're doing 30 kilometers an hour, and then we come to a traffic light, we have to come to a complete stop and unclip, put our foot down on the floor. That means that we're gonna be starting back at 0 kilometers an hour. When we take off at 0 kilometers an hour, as opposed to riding at 30k an hour, it's quite difficult. So if you have enough time to think as you're coming up to the traffic light, remembering that you're gonna have to probably unclip your pedal if you're using clips as well, if you can drop down to a slightly easier gear, that means that when we take off at the traffic light at 2 kilometers an hour, then 5, then 10, then 15, we can work our way through that and come back down the cassette as needed. So dropping to an easier gear will definitely help. Again, I'm gonna compare this back to the manual car thing I was talking about. You might be cruising down the street in 6th gear, hand on the steering wheel, come to a traffic light, you come back down to a complete stop and you put it back in neutral. When you take off at the traffic light again, you're not gonna take off in 6th gear. I don't even know if many clutch pedals could handle taking off in 6th gear anyway. You're gonna be taking off in 1st gear again, and then you get up to speed, and then you move across to 2nd, up to speed, move across to 3rd. Same idea with the bike. We want to start in a lower gear. Your legs might be strong enough that lower gear doesn't necessarily mean 1st gear. You might be strong enough to take off in 3rd gear, for example. But nonetheless, you might want to drop down to a slightly easier gear as you're coming up to the halt at the traffic lights. If you've been spending some time riding up in the hills and you're going up a really steep hill and you're in your easiest gear and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this hill is getting really difficult. I want to go to one easier gear, and you click it and there is no such thing as that easier gear. First of all, that just sucks. Sometimes when you need an easier gear and it's not there, it's just the worst. You just gotta power through it. However, if you were to come into the bike shop and tell them that problem, a lot of the time you can put a slightly larger rear cassette on there or smaller chain rings to make it a little bit easier to go up that hill. You can add what some of us sucks would call an easier granny gear. You can add a slightly easier gear to go up the hill. If you've got a really large cassette, like this one, that biggest cog that we've got, which is the easiest cog, is going to make it really easy to go up the steep hill. Whereas if we look at this one here, I'll put them next to each other so you see, but you can see there's a really big difference between these two. To be fair, this is probably the most extreme of both ends, so you can be anywhere in between this as well, but you could go to a slightly larger cassette to make it a little bit easier for yourself. The overarching lesson that we've got here is that as your speed changes, you should be changing gear appropriately as well. It'll make it a little bit easier or a little bit harder, which are both considered good things. Well, I hope this video has helped you understand a little bit more about gears and understand the difference between gears and when you should be shifting, how you should be shifting, and everything around that topic. If you reckon there's anything that we've missed, or if you appreciated this video, let us know in the comments below. I love reading all those lovely little comments. If you reckon there's anything that we've missed, let us know. If there's anything that you've learned throughout your journey of getting into cycling, also let us know. Otherwise, I'm going to say thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next video. See you guys.